Well, hello and welcome to In the Growth Space. I'm your host, David McGlennon, and welcome to Season 4. I just can't even hardly believe it. It's Season 4, and we're rapidly approaching our 200th episode. Man, just amazing. But I'm so excited for this season as we get kicked off here today. I'll talk about today's guest in a moment, but one of the things that I like to do myself, if you've been around this podcast for any length of time, you know I like to try new things and get outside my own comfort zone so that I can personally grow. And so we're going to be trying some new things this year, this season. We talk about growth from a number of different angles and a number of different perspectives. We tackle topics around leadership, company growth, personal growth, financial growth, a number of different areas of growth. And so if you are new to the podcast, I would just invite you to go back to our very first season and really take a listen to maybe the first couple of episodes. I know I'm rough on the scripting, but it's also a good place though to get a little bit better acquainted with me, my story, my growth journey, and really just to get to know me maybe a little bit better. But if you're new to the podcast, again, hit subscribe. If you're on YouTube, hit the little notification bell, and that way you'll always be notified when we upload new material. And we're going to be experimenting with some new formats this year and also just some new approaches, new ways of sharing stories, new ways of maybe exposing you to new thinking, exposing myself to new thinking and new approaches and new growth areas. But if you're a leader, this episode is definitely for you. It's a conversation really that shares a lot of practical ways to help you grow, not just personally, but really by unlocking the brilliance and the potential within your team and the people that are either on your team, in your company, within your organization, maybe even just your family as well. So today's episode is a great conversation with someone who I've been mentored by, who I've been taught by, and his name is Jon Berghoff. If you don't know that name, I'm going to tell you a little bit about him right now. Because Jon is an amazing leader. He is the creator and founder of xchange. He is considered a pioneer in the field of transformational group facilitation. He's very highly demanded and in high demand as a designer and facilitator for global CEO summits, leadership conferences, and also high-stake gatherings. He has done high-stakes gatherings for Conscious Capitalism, Women Presidents Organization, HeartMath, Arthur Page Society, NASA, Keller Williams, BMW, Google, HPE, EOS, Facebook, and a whole slew of additional groups and organizations. He's trained over 15,000 coaches, consultants, and change agents, and they're using this xchange approach to redefine how we unlock the potential at scale through transformational learning experiences. I'm one of those 15,000 coaches and consultants and change agents. I've been exposed to his work, and if you've been to the Emerging Leader Inner Circle groups, or if you've been to the Inner Circle Summit, you've seen me utilize his approaches to gathering people and creating conversations. I have to say, he's one of the most abundant-minded leaders that I've met, and I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. So I'm going to get out of the way and just let's get into this conversation right now with Jon Berghoff. Well, hey, Jon, welcome to In the Growth Space, man. I am super delighted to have you here and really honored to have you on the show.
Thanks, David. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, it's our kickoff episode for season 4. We're rapidly
Awesome.
leaning into 200 episodes, and man, I couldn't be more excited to have this conversation with you today because I think now more than ever, leaders are looking for ways to handle and approach. I'll call it life in the fast lane. I mean, things are changing so fast in our world that finding new approaches and ways of working, I think, are so important. And so I'm sure we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But I'd love for you to share with the audience maybe a little bit about your own personal growth journey. I know that early in your career, you were a sales leader at Cutco, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, you were the youngest to be inducted into the Hall of Fame there, and so
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to share about, as you said, my personal growth journey. So we can just start where you just pointed out. Yeah, I was very fortunate that I had a very positive experience as a young entrepreneur. The part of that story that I think is probably just, if not more important, is knowing that that actually happened at a time in my life where I was really struggling. In fact, let me think about this, from between sixth grade and like my sophomore year of high school, within about a 4-year span, for a number of reasons, I was in 4 different schools. And if anybody's ever experienced anything like that, or maybe can imagine, that combined with it, just, I didn't find a way to navigate that in a healthy way. So at that time in my life, it was a very difficult time. I struggled all through high school, not just academically. I eventually failed to get accepted to every college I applied to. So you check that box. I was failing mentally, emotionally, psychologically as well. And the only reason I point that out, and I'm happy to talk about, any part of my growth journey, as you said, is because I had so much pain at that time in my life that when people hear things like what you said about how I ended up having a lot of success, I genuinely believe a lot of the success came from just wanting to no longer feel a lot of the pain I was feeling. I remember somebody saying, you either succeed out of inspiration or desperation. And I think I had a good dose of both. So yeah, as you pointed out, at a young age, I was very fortunate to, at a time when it really helped me as like a way out, meet some mentors who inspired me to really value learning for the sake of that enabling me to create value in the world. And I kind of had no other option than to, see what that would lead to. And then, fast forward about a decade after that period of time, at also a pretty young age, I think I was 26, 27, I was brought in to be the head of sales for the Vitamix Corporation. They make high-end blending equipment. And
we've got
so now all of a sudden,
so your sales
got
works.
2 of them. Huh? Well, thank you for your purchases. We could talk about your favorite smoothie recipes later.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So I was at a young age given this incredible kind of career-changing, life-changing opportunity by Jody Berg, who the CEO, and her cousin, Lori Connors, the CFO. And they were both great-granddaughters of the founders of Vitamix. It's today a 100-plus-year-old company. And they were already like the market global leader in high-end blending equipment. And here I am, responsible for a couple hundred employees in our largest, profit and revenue center. And in some ways I felt like I'm the man. And in other ways I thought, what the heck am I going to do now? Right. Anyways, we had a great run there for about 5 years or so. An incredible growth story of its own that was just a huge blessing. And then we left there to found what is today xchange, and happy to go wherever you want in the conversation. But that's a little bit about my path or my journey.
Yeah, I love that. And what? So there's so many different ways I'd love to go. But what led you to create or found what now is xchange? I'm kind of curious what that genesis was.
Yeah, well, I think if you take the story I just told, and I don't think I've ever tried to articulate it this way, so see how this goes. If I look at my whole life or my career in like stages, the first act was that time in my life going through high school where I got into this entrepreneurial opportunity. And the way I look at that is I was a beneficiary of a company, Cutco, as you said, that had this amazing culture. And that culture was so powerful. It gave me a place where, as a struggling young person, I could actually feel like I belonged. I could be who I was and fit in. And I could discover and develop strengths of mine that I had never appreciated. And so fast forward, when I'm now in this position at Vitamix, where when I got there, I had about 200 salespeople and a bunch of managers that reported, to me. And by the time I left, it was 600 salespeople. It was a pretty epic growth experience. But the whole time, my motivation, initially it was kind of a secret, and then I just realized I should let people in on it. I wanted to create a workplace that did for others what was done for me. I wanted to create a place where, whether people were with us for a long time or just a short season, it would be transformational for them. It would be healing. It would be a place where when they went home to their families and in their communities, because of how we behave together at work, that we would create positive ripples. I think managers and leaders need to see their responsibility as something that extends beyond the 9 to 5, so to speak, because how we treat people and how we interact right now during the day, it ripples into how I'm going to interact with my kids tonight. And, there's nothing means more than that to me. So anyways, what happened, you asked, how did I go from being at Vitamix to founding this company today? So what happened was something very practical. While I was at Vitamix, there was a combination of challenges and opportunities that anybody who's managed or led any team can probably relate to. So on one hand, we're trying to create results, which is, kind of the thing that a lot of people care about more than anything, right? Like we're all measured on hard business results. Sure. And on the other hand, I had a bias towards creating a powerful culture for reasons that I just explained. And then just the nature of things, it just so happened that at the time I got there, we were facing a lot of change in our industry with our largest customers, inside our company. From every direction, we had to navigate change. I wanted to strengthen our culture. And as a head of sales, the practical thing we had to do was also just multiply learning and knowledge across our sales team. So everything I just described, David, I had this aha one day, and I remember it. It was in 2012, where I had just led one of our regional sales meetings on the East Coast with a couple hundred people, and I got on a plane to go then lead the Central, and then I led our West Coast, and then I was over in Europe and in Japan and South America. I was going all over the world. And I realized, wow, all these things that we're trying to accomplish, the most practical place where we have the most leverage is how we design and lead meetings. And that was an aha for me.
Interesting.
And so what it eventually led to is, there was a philosophy that we developed and a set of tools on how we designed and led different types of conversations in these meetings, which is all very practical. We realized, wow, one of the most practical places to shape culture, drive change, affect results, do all these things that really matter is actually through how we gather. And for a lot of people, it's obvious as soon as you say it. It's like, oh yeah, look at how much we invest in time, money, resources, people in different types of gatherings. And so when I left Vitamix with the blessing and just incredible support of our executive team, I left at a time when nobody was leaving. It was like, what are you doing? I had this calling. And Jody, the CEO, was so incredible, Dave. You want to talk about an amazing leader. I left and it would have been so easy for them to be filled with fear or frustration. And instead they hosted this like send-off party for me.
Wow.
Maybe they were ready for me to go. I don't know, but no, it was
I doubt it.
so dignified and so respectful. And then for a little while, we didn't really know exactly what we were going to do at Exchange, but what it evolved into is teaching different types of leaders or change agents, folks like yourself who are consultants or coaches who do leadership development work, a methodology for how to bring groups together where we can not only enable that group to tap into their deepest or highest thinking, whether it's a leadership development workshop or a company-wide meeting. It's not just about tapping into our collective intellect, but how do we also design and lead meetings and gatherings that connect people in meaningful ways and ultimately strengthen the culture, the sense of belonging or even community in the room. And so now we've trained, thousands of folks in our methodologies around creating transformational gatherings of different types.
I love that. Well, and I tell you, I was attracted to your work, actually long before I actually joined Exchange, because I was a listener to your friend Hal Elrod's podcast. And I remember when you took over his podcast when he was going through his cancer journey. I think it was his second cancer journey. And I distinctly remember when I remember where I was at when I was listening to, I think, the initial episode. And I thought to myself, wow, this is such a unique approach, because you were talking about it then. And, and some of the work that you were doing to transform, I think, even if I'm not mistaken, you did some work with the city of Cleveland
that's right.
There was some, just massive transformation. And I think that what attracted me to it is that you were able to balance or integrate both the head and the heart, because I know that there are people who typically tend towards one or the other, but bringing a group together and integrating both the head and the heart it's tough to do, but it's also necessary to really bring people together. So I maybe talk a little bit about that. Like, how did you discover an approach that brings those two things together in gatherings?
Yeah, well, this phrase that you're bringing forward, like how do we invite or engage the head in the heart? There's multiple meanings to that phrase for us. And it could be very easy for somebody to hear this conversation before we go any further and think, oh, the heart, what are we talking about? Is this really necessary? And I was a leader who, even while I was at Vitamix, I did not fully understand. I didn't appreciate at all what I think we now are learning today about creating the conditions where we engage the whole person. And when you say the head and the heart, that's a great metaphor for just engaging the whole person.
Right.
And, I think anybody who manages or leads has a shared aspiration to be able to create the conditions where people bring about their best, where they bring their creativity, they're resilient, they treat each other in dignified ways. And they're able to collectively work together through whatever changes or challenges they're facing. Like nobody's going to disagree with, we've got to bring out the best. And what we've noticed at Exchange is that what really inspires the best is an experience of wholeness. And what does that mean? Well, it's honoring that if we invite people to come together in ways that are not just intellectual, but we also honor how important it is to strengthen their relationship with each other. That's, to me, actually a heart connection. Yeah. Even if they're having conversations around difficult work challenges, just recognizing the importance of designing meetings, having conversations that bring the whole person forward. And And there's also a very scientific explanation for this idea of the head and the heart. We have some good friends at an organization called the HeartMath Institute. And I'm sure you're familiar. And,
yes.
HeartMath, the word math actually is representing the science. And the heart, in the HeartMath, this organization for almost 50 years has been studying something called coherence. There's other words for this too. It's some folks will talk about self-regulation, or if you just want to use really plain terms, our ability to be at our best when we're under the most difficult conditions. This organization, HeartMath, has been scientifically researching, studying, and measuring what goes on inside of us when we're at our best. And it's called coherence. And it's actually when the heart and the brain are actually in sync, right? Okay. All of our systems are working well. And when we're at our best, we can talk about how to do this too. When we're at our best, we become measurably more creative. We become measurably more connected to our intuitive ability to make good decisions, especially in the face of complex situations. We are far more effective at interacting and relating with others. So all of these things, everybody wants to enable. And we can enable it within people individually, but also in how they relate and even collectively on a team. And as far as the how-to, maybe I can just say a couple things about that.
Yeah, love you.
Yeah, so the heart actually has an intelligence. The heart has an intelligence. And, if we were to ask anybody, when we're stressed, what can we notice about our body? Well, one of the first things we might notice is our breathing is shallow, but also our heart rate might accelerate. And there's measurements that actually look at all this. But if we learn how to actually just breathe, slow down our breath, let's imagine I'm under a lot of stress. If I can just actually relearn how to breathe in a more healthy way, that's actually the beginning of bringing my faculty, even my brain, online, right? And then if I add to that an invitation to connect to what we might call heart qualities, and heart qualities can be an invitation to bring to a difficult moment a sense of compassion for either others who are dealing with this or myself, or even just a sense of curiosity. And curiosity might just feel like a neutral heart quality, but we should never underestimate how powerful it can be just to get to neutral, especially under stress. And there's many other heart qualities, care for others. But the whole point is when we learn how to breathe, slow down, invite certain qualities that you might call a quality of the heart, it brings our highest intelligences online. And someone might hear this and say, okay, well, I'll try that out, but am I supposed to ask others to do that in a meeting? Not necessarily. But what we've learned is that kind of the first responsibility of a manager or leader is to do the inner work, to regulate what's going on inside of us. Because if we look at what actually happens when we interact with others, and there's all sorts of scientific validation for this that actually goes back a number of decades, our emotions are contagious. It's called social and emotional contagion. It's called what happens in a group of people. And our first responsibility is what's going on inside of us. So I'll stop and see what that provokes.
Man, there's so much there. I love this conversation because I think that there is an element to our own emotions that, especially from I'm going to say an older generation, that we're not used to tapping into those. And I say we, because I'm kind of at the tail end of the baby boomer generation.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that I want to be that bridge that bridges the sometimes generational divide that happens within groups, within teams. And
Yeah.
I think this is such a great way and such a powerful way to begin. And I know that I've had my own journey in this approach and being aware of noticing my own emotions and regulating my own emotions. It's helped me tremendously. And I guess I'm wondering, how do you see some leaders, because you get exposed to CEOs all across the world
Hmm.
and other leaders all across the world. How do you see them using this to really bring out the best in their teams, especially throughout, the generations? Because I think that's a big topic right now.
Mm. Yeah, I love that you're asking that. And, it's really meaningful for me. I'm sitting here, I'm looking down at my desk. One of the two pictures that I keep in front of me, this is my mother.
Oh, I
And
love that. It's awesome.
yeah, and I'm sitting at the piano. I'm not a great piano player, but I can play just enough that my mom, who's in the kind of later stages now of dementia,
Mm.
I would, when she was still at home, I would play music and it would like immediately bring her to this really cool place. And
Oh, neat.
our relationship got even stronger as she kind of cognitively started to fade away. The only
Mm.
reason I'm just acknowledging my mom is because in an interesting coincidence or synchronicity, whatever, most of my mentors became women of are women of her generation.
Oh,
And I already mentioned Jody and Lori,
yeah. Right.
and there are many others, Meg Wheatley and Jackie Stavros and Debbie Rosman, who's the CEO of the HeartMath Institute. It's actually quite fascinating that I've probably got about 8. Lynn Twist has become a very close personal mentor. Of the most critical mentors to me are actually all women who are
Women, yeah,
today
sure.
in their between late 60s and 80. Anyways, I only share that because I've had firsthand benefit of being mentored by teachers of a generation or two beyond me.
Mm.
I'm 42 today. I'm not quite a millennial. I think I'm a Gen X or Z.
Yeah.
I don't know all the labels.
Yeah, it's hard to, yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I'm supposed to. But in our work of facilitating meetings that are meant to bring out the best,
Mm-hmm.
we are very interested in how do we make sure that we are having conversations that are intergenerational whenever possible.
Mm.
Whether it's a team, an organization, or an association or a learning community, folks who've been, team members for 1 year, connecting with folks who've been here for 20.
Yeah.
Somebody who's brand new as part of a group, being connected with someone who's been a member of that group for a decade. The power of connecting generations is so significant.
Mm.
There was actually a community development project that I believe began in the 80s that I think a lot of organizations and associations have learned from actually. And it began, I believe her name was Bliss Brown. She was a community organizer in Chicago. And she had this vision of sorts. And my best recollection of how this unfolded is she saw a need to create connection between generations in some of the different cities or around Chicago. And she would bring together elders with youth, and they would interview each other.
Mm.
And it became known as Imagine Chicago. And since then, I think Imagine initiatives have been recorded in like 100 countries where you have different generations sitting eye to eye, face to face, listening to each other.
Love that.
And I think one of the beautiful inspirations from that initiative is the recognition that we all have something we might be able to appreciate from those who've come before us or those who are coming next. And it's not an either or a both and. Often these conversations can become contentious or divided because one generation will say, well, they don't appreciate what got us here.
Mm.
And then the newer generation will say, well, they don't understand what's happening or how things are changing.
Sure.
And I think what we have to learn is to appreciate both perspectives and bring them together. which is something we're often thinking about when we design meetings. That intergenerational appreciation is so key. I'll just say that and see where you want to go with it.
Yeah, well, you just used a word there that I absolutely love, appreciation. And I think that obviously I know this, but our audience probably doesn't know this, but the work that you do and the work that Exchange facilitates really is based on a concept of appreciative inquiry. And I'd love for you maybe to talk a little bit about that, because where I think I think first of all, I love this of being to be able to bring the generations together through appreciation, where we've been, appreciation what is now, and then appreciation where we can go. And I think, no, I don't think, I know that the work that Exchange does and the approach that you teach does exactly that. And I really want our listeners to understand this, because I think when they get a hold of how powerful this is, I think it can change the world.
Yeah, well, I love that. I'm happy to talk about what we've learned from the whole field of appreciative inquiry. And I think a good starting point, David, is an invitation for any of us that are in these positions of management or leadership to recognize that when a team comes together, or any group of people come together to learn together, to create, to solve problems, whatever it is, there is a power that is available. There is a potential that lives in that group. But we often are not tapping into what's available. And oftentimes we have folks in positions of influence, leadership, management, who have great intentions. They're very intelligent and they have good hearts, but they're not tapping into what's available. And one of the necessities that we are seeing is we have to start to see a group of people no longer as like a machine, if we're going to use the metaphor. Yeah. We're not just a mechanical system where our goal is to try and control and predict, and a few people tell everybody else what to do. That philosophy and paradigm and all the management tactics and tools that match that made a lot of sense about 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But for so many of us, I'll just use myself as an example. Here at Exchange, we've got 13. We just added somebody, maybe 14 people on our team. You know, we're a very small team. And even though I'm a founder and the visionary and creator, most of what we're trying to do, I don't know how to do it. and no one on our team has ever done it. So like, we don't have a choice but to humbly look at each other and start by saying, okay, we're trying to achieve something that none of us individually or collectively ever have. And I think a lot of people can actually relate to that more than the idea of we know exactly what to do and how to do it, and all we need to do is do that very productively, right? Yeah. So what I'm going to encourage is that we view a team, an organization, a group of people, not as a mechanical system, but as a living system. And if somebody's hearing these phrases for the first time, what I want you to know is that there's actually a whole emerging field of scientific research and discovery around what a living system actually is. So for example, nature is a living system. Any group of people are a living system. One person is actually a living system. It's a more complex way of understanding what's available and what's possible. And just to try and keep this super practical, David, we can learn a lot about how we manage and lead when we see a group of people as a living system. Here's an example. If I see a team as a living system, then I all of a sudden realize that all of the power lies in our connectedness. All of the strength lies in how we interact with each other. I also discover that a living system has a quality where it is able to actually self-organize. What does that mean? What it means is if I walk out in the woods, the trees and the bushes and the mushrooms, no one has a title. There's no organizational chart. Yet somehow there's an intelligence. Yeah. And I'm not saying we don't have a use for titles and hierarchy, but what we need are to create conditions where great ideas can come from anybody. Yeah. And another quality of a living system is something called emergence, right? Let's not forget, a human somehow can give birth to another human, right? Right? Yeah. All of my computers on this desk here don't know how to do that yet, right? Right. Yes. There's a magic and a mystery. There's an ability to create something that wasn't there before. Yeah. So in really practical terms, what we've been curious about is what are the approaches and philosophies that leverage these qualities of a living system? Mm-hmm. By the way, another quality I want to point to is a living system, a healthy one, is constantly giving and receiving. There's constant cycles of giving and receiving. Wow. So you take these qualities I just mentioned, and you look for what are the tools and the paradigms that enable us to leverage these. And appreciative inquiry is one for several reasons, because it starts with the power of the questions that we ask, right? There's no faster way to invite ideas and innovation than by asking a different question. Yeah. There's no faster way than to approach our biggest problems faster than by changing the questions that we ask. The questions, they change the future before the answers arrive. That's how much reverence we give to them, right? Yeah. So then let's talk about what are the questions that work really well. And this is why we love appreciative inquiry. And what does appreciative inquiry mean? It means asking questions that bring about life from a person or a group of people. And what does it mean to bring life? It means to help us to actually find the energy and information to tackle our biggest problems, create our biggest opportunities. In nature, everything grows towards the sun. Right. It's called the heliotropic effect. In people, we want to learn to ask questions and allow for conversations that bring people alive, even in the face of difficult challenges. Mm-hmm. So there's also another argument for why you want to ask very specific types of questions, because we want to ask questions that invite people to bring their strengths, not necessarily their weaknesses, not because we want to ignore the weaknesses, but Peter Drucker said it best when he was asked years ago, what's the key to leadership? And at the time, I think he'd probably written more about management and leadership than anybody. And he said, it's simple. It's to align the strengths of a system so much so that the weaknesses become irrelevant. So what is the essence of appreciative inquiry? Let me give you two practical examples. It starts with understanding that we can ask questions that get us distracted by what's wrong, what's broken, what's missing, or questions that can catapult us by exploring possibility, what has worked, what is working, what has gotten us here. Even when we're trying to solve a problem, there's actually an appreciative way to do it, not ignore it. I'll give you two examples. I'll start with a personal one. My daughter, Sierra, you've probably heard me tell this story. A few years ago, she's 12 today. I think she was 9 at the time. She brings home her report card. And I use this because we can all relate to it. And she brings home the report card. And, as soon as she opens it up, it's got a handful of A's and maybe a few B's, and there may have been a C. And in the work that we do, in teaching managers and leaders how to ask smarter questions, we know that we ought to focus on what's working. Right. But yet there's a biological reason why we all have a bias to go quickly to what's wrong or what's broken. There's actually a biological answer for that, because there's a part of how we're wired that is what has kept humans alive, that fixates on reacting towards what is negative. So let's just be okay understanding that. Yeah. So I'm sitting there saying in my head, David, okay, don't do it. Don't say it. Don't focus on it. And I still can't control it. And I say, how'd you get a C, right? And the true story of how that conversation went was, she said nothing and walked away. And then 2 minutes later, we drove to soccer practice, which as a parent, you don't often have a lot of time, and you get one shot. But the same is true as a manager. Like our relation, all of our results we get are through people and teams. Right. And all of our relationships hinge on every conversation. And a lot of our conversations, we only have a few minutes. Yeah. And so oftentimes the first question we ask really is fateful. It's going to affect everything else. Yeah. And so what could the conversation have been, right? Instead of fixating on what was not working, what I could have asked is, wow, you got 4 A's. How does that feel? Tell me about that. And anybody listening to this, they all know how the conversation would have gone.
Yeah, sure.
Instead of walking away, she would have leaned in. And then maybe I could have asked, what did you learn in terms of how you got those A's? What did you do? And we all know she'd be more motivated to have that conversation. And this whole conversation is an analogy. It's a symbol for at work every day when something goes wrong or somebody makes a mistake. How do we come into that?
Yeah.
Because if we come into it reactive and unconsciously making people uncomfortable and not even wanting to acknowledge what they did or how they contributed to a mistake, well, not only will they not want to tell me in the future, but now they're going to take less risk. Now they're not going to try something new or different. And that's a downward spiral, right? Yeah. So one of the conditions we want to learn how to create through our questions and our conversations is people feeling safe enough to talk about not only what's working well, but what isn't. That's what we need in a healthy culture, right? So in Sierra's case, could have asked her what's working, and she would have stayed in the conversation, and we probably would have learned more from that even if we never talked about the C's, she may have transferred that learning, right? So I'll give you a business example, David, for anybody who wants that. And it's a true story that I love to use because it's so illuminating. There was an airline years ago that wanted to fix their lost baggage problem. And any manager who thinks about any of their most important problems to solve could relate to this and say, well, yeah, we have problems that we can't ignore and we got to address. And if you're an airline, that sounds super practical. Well, they were introduced to this methodology called appreciative inquiry. And it was pointed out to them that there might be a smarter question than how do we fix our lost baggage problem? And they designed a different question that every conversation followed after that. The new question they designed was, how do we create an exceptional arrival experience? And the difference between these two questions, how do I fix the lost baggage problem and how do I create exceptional arrival experience? It's not that one is addressing the problem and the other is not. It's that one is actually flipping the whole issue to what do we ultimately want here? What's the positive opposite of the problem? Right. And any of us at any moment can look at any problem and be mindful of, are we getting fixated? I mean, how many of us have found that our work, if we're not careful, can one day be something that we wake up and the whole thing feels like it's always a big problem to be solved. If we're not careful, we forget how important it is to flip that question to what do we ultimately want to create? What would excellence look like? What do we want to be celebrating? And that's just a great starting point, right? Yeah. And then we can ask a whole bunch of other appreciative questions on, okay, well, what has worked? Well, if nothing's worked, what have we at least learned? We can even be appreciative towards all of our failures.
Sure.
Okay, that's the past. What about right now? What is working that we want to remember to keep doing or do more of? And what do we want to do next to get there? And okay, who's going to take ownership and what are we going to do right now? I mean, all of these are embarrassingly simple. That's by design, but they're a lot different than how bad is this? Whose fault is it? How did we get here? Which could eventually get to a solution. It just might not be the most productive way. So let me stop and see where you want to go from here.
Man, I love where this conversation has gone because I often talk in organizations and especially around culture about practicing blameless problem solving. And what you're talking about is exactly that. This is the way to do that. It's asking different questions. And I guess one of the things that I've noticed over the years that I've been working with some leaders is that oftentimes they have not been taught how to ask good questions. So how would you tell a new leader, an emerging leader, how do they ask better questions? How do they begin to kind of think about questions that, the questions that you were just asking were all open-ended questions. They were questions that elicit a response as opposed to yes or no, or I don't know. How would you advise somebody?
Yeah, so a couple things here. It all starts with having coming from a place of genuine curiosity and humility, right?
Yeah.
It all starts from somebody who has a so-called title, realizing that my job isn't necessarily to know everything or have all the answers. I'm supposed to have some intellectual capability, yes, and maybe my job is just as much to think about which questions to ask. And I'll start with some very mundane examples, and then we can get to like a framework that somebody could use anytime they're sitting in a meeting or walking into one, right? Or about to click a Zoom link. It's like, okay, what could be some good questions? But oftentimes, like in the very middle of a meeting, I or someone on our team might stop and just ask, hey, before we go any further, we're talking about a really important initiative or project. Can we just make sure we're all clear? Whose decision will this be? That's a very practical example of like, let's just make sure we understand who is it that's actually going to own the final say on this, right? I actually like that question because it's a great way for me as the CEO and founder to not automatically become the one that either I or others think should be owning every decision. That's one that personally I want to make sure I bring in, right? Like whose decision? Oh yeah, this isn't just whoever's the loudest person or has the most senior title. Like actually this needs to be this person's. And sometimes that's a great way of reminding us of who needs to be owning things, right? I'll give you another really practical question inside of a meeting. And that is oftentimes teams can be in the middle of a conversation. And for whatever reason, in our attempt to have a productive conversation, we actually start having multiple conversations at once. And we can probably all relate to this where as soon as one person realizes we're having multiple conversations, that person will get frustrated. And then maybe we name it and then we're all frustrated. What I love to do is whenever I see an opportunity, and others on our team will do this as well, is if we feel like our conversation has just taken on so much complexity that it's hard to stay in it, it's often because we've lost track of what is the question that we're answering right now. That's actually one of my favorite questions to bring in is, hey, I just want to say for a second, I'm doing my best, but Nick, you're making this point. Steve, you're making this point. Leah and Stephanie, you're talking about this. I want to honor everything, but I'm struggling because I actually am not quite sure what is the question that our conversation is trying to answer. Sometimes that'll bring us all back, right? I'll give you another, just hopefully these feel practical. Another practical example. In the middle of a group having a conversation, one of the biggest reasons why there is conflict is because, and there's a concept that is often associated with brainstorming. And there's a reason why brainstorming has a higher failure rate than success rate, depending on what research you look at. One of the reasons is not the only one. We can address the other one. One of the reasons why is because you got 4 people having a conversation. And let's say 2 of us are operating in a way where we are generating ideas because in our mind, that's what we thought we were supposed to be doing right now. But then there's another 2 people in the same exact meeting who what they're doing is they're actually trying to make a decision, right? They're converging. To decide is to die off, to eliminate. It's one of the simplest reasons groups have conflicts and no one in the room knows why, is because 2 people are cognitively trying to narrow down and the other 2 are actually trying to create more possibilities. So one of the simple, just really practical invitations is, hey, are we in an idea generation where we're not judging, filtering, deciding, evaluating, we're just trying to get ideas out? Or are we actually narrowing down and converging? That's again, just a practical example of one question that can sometimes turn around a difficult meeting. I'll give you one more, and this is one that is it's really a personal favorite because I'm an introvert in a sense, and I kind of like to think before I talk. And I don't say that as a virtue. Actually, we're all wired differently. Some people think as they talk. I know playfully we could say some people don't think, they just talk.
Right. They just talk.
Right. And that's okay. We all communicate and operate in our own design, and we're not better or worse. I really like to think.
Yeah.
And what I've found is sometimes in a meeting, we're about to have a conversation, or maybe we're already in the middle of one. And what I'm feeling for myself, and oftentimes it means it might benefit others, is I actually need a moment to like gather my thoughts about the conversation that we're stepping into, have already stepped into, or about to get into. And so I or others might just say, hey, Leah, I can tell we're about to talk about, some of our financials right now. And, we all have a responsibility to have things to say about different variances or what's up or what's down. Can I get just like a minute just to take my pen and my Post-it notes and just gather my thoughts before I comment on this piece? Oh yeah, sure. And obviously I'm inviting everyone else to gather their thoughts, but I can't tell you how useful it is to give people space to think before we're invited to speak, so to speak. So these are what I wanted to start with, David, or what I would consider like the kinds of questions that can turn around a meeting in real time so that someone could listen to this and go affect a meeting a little bit later.
Yeah.
We can also talk about what are the kinds of questions that we can design that actually drive and affect conversations very directly. But let me pause to see if there's anything you wanted to comment on.
Well, the only thing I was going to comment on is just your last practical application of just taking a minute and taking a moment. I know there's at least one person in our audience, because I know them personally, who is going to benefit from that practical application alone. Just being able to say, hey, give me just a moment. I need to gather my thoughts before I step into this conversation. I think that's so practical for a number of different people. And I think I don't use that enough. And I think that is such a great application of being able to give people the space they need to think before then they speak. So I just wanted to comment on that. I think it's wonderful. I love that.
Yeah. So maybe, the original essence of what I think you were inviting is also insight on just what have we learned about the different ways that questions can bring about different qualities of thinking. And I'll share with you maybe 2 or 3 of our favorite questions to bring into any gathering. And I'll start with the one we use the most, and often we use at the beginning of a meeting. And it's a question that invites the whole room. It doesn't matter if there's 2 of us or 200 of us, to connect to a shared sense of meaning or purpose around coming together.
Yeah.
And what I found is it's a really important, almost ritual to have, because especially if we're moving from meeting to meeting, conversation to conversation, or people are coming in and their energy and attention is maybe scattered because of what they've been dealing with prior to this meeting, it's really helpful to get everybody centered and grounded around, okay, why is this conversation, why is this meeting, why is this project, initiative, this plan, this opportunity, why is this important for us? And by the way, that can be the question. Yeah. What is it about this that is important to us? Why is this meaningful? And what we have found is when we give space for that and we let folks reflect on it and then share their perspective, it can deepen the sense of purpose around everything else that we do for the remainder of that meeting. And in that particular question, there's different ways to ask it. Right. Another version of it would be, especially if a team has any history together, and we're about to launch a new initiative or a project, or we're kicking off the solving of some big problem. Oftentimes a team can reconnect to a sense of meaning or purpose by inviting each other to bring in, not just in the present, why does this feel meaningful? But another option is to look back into the past and say, hey, what's a story that reminds us of why our work is so important in the world? What's a story that reminds us, maybe it's a time where we created a really powerful outcome for a customer. Maybe it's the way that our company or our culture helped one of our employees or made a difference in our local community. It's inviting people to bring moments from the past as reminders for why the world needs us to keep going. Because when we get under pressure, under stress, we can just lose connection to these examples, stories, moments that can be beautiful and inspiring us in what we have already achieved, right? So David, that's one example of a question that we love to begin a gathering with, is inviting voices in. This is not a rhetorical question. No, this is not, hey, I want y'all to think about why it's important to be here. Let's get to the meeting. No, this is a question that we invite people to share their answers to.
Yeah.
Which is exponentially more powerful than if we don't. It's also exponentially more powerful than me telling everybody why being here is important.
Exactly.
Right? That's the command, control, coercion model.
Right.
I can contribute my answer, but I should invite everybody else's too.
Yeah.
Right? There's a critical value to that. That's one type of question that's that we use all the time. Another one, David, is let's talk about using a question that can help us to learn from the past. So an example would be, let's say a team has come together and our topic is our sales or marketing, right? And there's some challenge we're trying to solve or problem we want to fix. It can be really useful to study peak experiences or moments of excellence or successes or wins. Because oftentimes if we stop and we say, well, when have we done well? What has worked? Right. It will reconnect us to when we have come from a place of strength or when we have executed from a place of strength. And oftentimes just by resurfacing and learning from when we have been at our best, we can pull lessons and learnings and success factors into the present to apply to whatever we do next. That's super practical, right?
Right.
I know I met you when you came into our trainings where we have a lot of coaches and consultants who lead different types of learning experiences.
Right.
Having a group of salespeople getting into small groups, talking about what's been my best prospecting strategy. Yeah. We call that crowdsourcing, call it whatever you want, but inviting people to share from their collective experience, what they've seen work. Yeah. We often lead, and folks that go through our trainings like you have are leading leadership development workshops. And whether it's a room of executives or a room where everybody's the top brass, a CEO is an example, just asking them, what are you learning right now about being a leader? And that question sounds embarrassingly obvious, but if the whole reason we came together is to multiply knowledge, then let's not forget that oftentimes the power in a question lies in the essence of it being simple, right? What are you learning that has mattered most for you? I can't tell you how many rooms of leaders we've just asked that question, let them have conversations for a long time, and the value is far beyond anything that I or any trainer could teach, right? Yeah. I'll give you maybe one other example, which is, we alluded to this earlier, but in a meeting, wherever it feels right and appropriate, inviting people to reflect on and share their perspective on, what do we want to be celebrating 6 months from now? What could success look like, sound like, feel like? I have found that, I'll use myself as an example. When I bring a question like that to our team at Exchange at a certain interval, whether it's our quarterly planning, annual planning, even sometimes more frequently, when I get to hear what others on the team say they would love to see us celebrating, there's multiple benefits to inviting their voices into that conversation. And it's not what everybody would think or expect. The purpose of asking a whole bunch of people, what do we want our future to look like, sound like, feel like? It's not because they are supposed to have all these so-called right answers. Sometimes they do have brilliant ideas, but that's actually not necessarily the sole purpose. So one reason that we invite a whole group, it's the same reason we invite how we learn from the past together, but to look ahead, is because we can be inspired by each other's answers. There's a co-elevation effect. Somebody says something I wasn't even thinking about. Well, now my thinking can build on that person's idea, right? Whether or not that person's thought is rationally what we're going to eventually execute on. Another benefit is it allows me as the CEO to hear where people's thinking is at. I mean, there's very few things that allow me to understand what people are thinking about than me not talking and listening to them sharing thoughts in response to a question. And one about the future is meaningful. It also tells me what future do they want to be a part of.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
really
key data for me.
Yeah.
Right? It also tells me what future they want to bring, they are inspired to bring their strengths to, which is important, because sometimes it's what do we want to be celebrating and how do you see yourself contributing to that? Yeah. And think about this. It's not just what I get to learn about everyone on our team, it's what they get to learn about each other. Yeah, it's the insight and the inspiration, right? And then let's just point out at least one more benefit, because there's more. Think about the difference between a team showing up where the leader says, here's what we need to do, and here's where we're going, and here's how we're going to get there, as opposed to the leader showing up saying, you know, I have some ideas on this, but I also want to present the question, and let's all hear each other's ideas. And that team really feeling heard, seen, felt. Yeah. That's when you realize, oh, the purpose of inviting people's perspective on the future is not because they're all supposed to have the so-called answer. It's because of what it does to somebody from the inside out when they're actually invited to be seen, heard, and felt. Yeah. Right? We talk about engagement, and we've had some of the world's experts on employee engagement come through our trainings and have these ahas like, oh my gosh, we don't need to talk about engagement. We actually just need to invite people to talk in ways that engage them. In ways that are important to the business. Yeah. So there's a whole multitude of benefits to these types of questions and conversations. But hopefully that gives a couple of useful examples.
Yeah, it's so good, John. And thank you, because I think the thing that keeps coming up for me as I hear you talking about these questions and inviting voices into the room is not just belonging, not just engagement, but I think something that comes before that, and it's really the psychological safety of being able to feel like I can put my answer to that question out into this meeting and not feel like I'm going to be, laughed at, lambasted, or put down. It's that safety, and that I think then cultivates the engagement, cultivates the creativity, and all of the things that you were just talking about. So I think that that's really important for our leaders to hear as well. I love all of the things that you're sharing here. So I know I want to be respectful of your time. I could go on for hours because I love this. But I feel like we should probably wrap up here.
Sure.
Tell our listeners a couple of ways that they might be able to engage in learning more, learning about exchange. I know that they can come to me because I've got some free seats to conscious leadership. And then I know you do a monthly exchange workshop. And I know that's maybe changing just a little bit, but share a little bit about how people can really connect with exchange and maybe even you personally.
Yeah, so if somebody wants to learn about our methodology and experience it in action live, we host a approximately once a month live workshop. I still host it live myself. I don't know how much longer I'll keep hosting it. We have others on our team who are more than capable to do it, and but it gives me a lot of joy to meet people. Sure. And during these live workshops, we lead an experience, it's all online. We lead a live experiential introduction to how do we create gatherings? How do we design and facilitate meetings, trainings, workshops, learning experiences that not only tap into the available learning, but also deepen the connection between participants and hopefully do it in a way that creates what people often tell us is this surprising, deep sense of connection and community and belonging. And we host these workshops about once a month, and we could put the URL out, David, with wherever you send this podcast out. But if anybody goes to xchangeapproach.com, the letter X, the word change approach.com, they can find info on these free workshops. And then we're we host 3 in 1 day immersion trainings people can enroll in if they want to learn our method as well. So if you met me through this podcast, tell me, because we love to meet friends of friends. So
absolutely. Well, and I will say that I have met some amazing people through the exchange community. Some of my newest friends and are some of my closest friends now, because of the ability to ask good questions and engage and connect the way that we're just talking about. And so I want to say thank you, Jon, for just your generosity of your spirit, generosity of sharing your knowledge. I said on the pre-roll that you're one of the most abundant-minded, abundant thinking individuals that I've ever met, and I just so appreciate that. And I want people to be able to just engage with you in however they can, because you're just somebody that is really special. And I'm so grateful that you've been generous with your time here today.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. It's great to be with you.
Well, folks, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're just listening on the podcast, if you're not subscribed yet, please hit subscribe and make sure that you don't miss the upcoming episodes. We're going to talk a lot more about this approach in the coming season, as well as other ways that we as leaders can continue to grow and grow in our leadership. So thanks for being a part of In the Growth Space. Until next time, be well.